Well, everything is changing quickly for the US dollar, and this past week we've seen two major events that are going to completely change the future of our world. The first event was the announcement of a new BRICS payment system that will in fact challenge the status of the US dollar in international transactions. But what's even bigger is the shocking announcement that after a 50-year run, the agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia to export oil exclusively in US dollars has officially ended on June 9th, 2024. And guess what? The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has decided to not renew its partnership with the US and instead will open up the Saudis' lucrative oil trade to other countries and currencies. Trust me, this is a massive blow to the status of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. For the past 50 years, the US government has mandated that oil must be sold exclusively in US dollars, elevating the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. It was honestly one of the most lucrative decisions the US government has ever made. But a world in where America is the sole superpower is officially over. Earlier this week, Reuters reported that Saudi Arabia has now joined a China-led central bank digital currency project in what could be another step towards less of the world's oil trade being done in US dollars. Last week, US Congressman Thomas Macy made an appearance on Tucker Carlson's podcast and gave one of the most authentic breakdowns of what's happening with the US dollar. Trust me, there are very few politicians in Washington who are actually worth listening to, but Congressman Macy doesn't sugarcoat what is really happening.
And we can do that as long as they use our currency. But I think it's going to end at some point. They're going to quit using our dollars as reserve currency. I mean, I watched your interview with Putin. One of the things he said that is true is when we sanctioned him, before we sanctioned Russia, 70% of their transactions were in US dollars. And after the sanctions, it's less than 20% of their transactions are in US dollars.
Ironically, every time the US government introduces a new economic sanction, it moves the world one step closer to de-dollarization. To be honest, the exact same thing is happening with the US government's microchip battle against China. The US doesn't want China to have access to America's best microchips, so in turn, they sanction China. But what does China do as a result? They invest in their domestic microchip industry, and within a few years are quickly closing the innovation gap. The best thing to ever happen to the Chinese semiconductor industry was getting sanctioned by the US government. This forced China to change and get stronger. If the US government continues to weaponize the US dollar and enforce sanctions, it opens the door for much larger problems.
And we're also sending a really clear signal, which is the dollar's not safe for you.
Right.
I mean, it's the reserve currency because it's a safe haven, because it's a stable country. It's the most stable country in the world, and we're not going to weaponize the dollar because that would be shooting ourselves. But suddenly we are.
Of course, we can see this unfolding in real time as well. Earlier this week, Joe Biden and French President Macron reached an agreement to use the profits of frozen Russian assets to send additional funding to Ukraine. This is a dangerous move from the US and French governments because it not only violates international law, but it exposes how much at odds Western leaders are with their populations on Ukraine. Last week, the Institute of Global Affairs published this groundbreaking study which reveals 94% of Americans and 88% of Western Europeans believe that NATO member countries should push for a negotiated settlement for the war in Ukraine. Literally 9 out of 10 citizens in both Western Europe and the US want this war in Ukraine to end, but our democratically elected officials, who are supposed to represent the people they serve, have other plans. Once again, this strategy will be a disaster for Western governments over the long term.
But one of the things we recently did in Congress, we passed something called the Repo Act, where we said we're just going to seize all of Russia's sovereign assets in the United States. Well, it turns out a lot of that is treasury debt that they've agreed to buy so that they can hold dollars. When people see that we've seized their money that they gave us in exchange for these treasury notes, then other countries won't want to buy our debt.
As I mentioned before, the US government has weaponized the dollar to the point where other countries are watching and are concerned about the long-term effects of holding too much dollars. One of those countries is, of course, China, who was once the largest holder of US Treasury bonds. At its peak, China held over $1 trillion worth of treasury bonds, but after the US launched a trade war against China, China has shifted their strategy. They no longer want to hold excessive amounts of US Treasury debt and are now offloading these debts in exchange for gold. China is not stupid, and it knows it could be a future victim of US sanctions itself.
You know, we probably wouldn't seize Great Britain's assets, but I could see us seizing China's assets.
Why would, I mean, that seems like theft. Just like take a country's assets. I mean, that belongs to the people of the country, right? It's not just Putin.
it is theft. Like, it's immoral, but even if you're okay with the amorality or immorality of it, it's short-sighted because eventually it'll catch up with us.
As you can see, this interview with Congressman Macy exposes a lot of truth, and it's why the other leading headline that BRICS is launching its own payment system was also significant this week. Here's a clip of Vladimir Putin speaking at the 2024 St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, which was held in Russia just last week. Pay attention to these words as he reveals the future of global trade.
По 23 год доля рубля в расчетах за российский экспорт выросла почти в 3 раза, до 39%. В 3 раза. Вместе с зарубежными партнерами будем наращивать применение национальных валют во внешнеторговых расчетах, повышать безопасность и эффективность таких операций. В том числе по линии БРИКС прорабатывается формирование независимой платежной системы, не подверженной политическому давлению, злоупотреблениями и внешнему санкционному вмешательству.
Now, if you listen exclusively to Western media, you probably will believe that Russia has been cut off from the outside world and that their economy is finished. But over 17,000 participants from over 130 countries attended this economic forum in Russia as Putin laid out the future of the BRICS plan for global trade. Remarkably, just a few days after this economic summit, Russia held another meeting which brought together the foreign ministers of each BRICS nation to outline the future goals of the organization. In total, there were 54 points addressed during this meeting, and I've read the entire report, so you don't have to. Here are the top 3 most important takeaways. Number 1, a new financial system. The BRICS organization wants to reform the entire global financial system to enhance the voice of developing nations and improve their access to international financial institutions. Under the current US dollar system, every country is under the mercy of the US government, and this remains the biggest motivation for BRICS. Create an independent payment system that uses local currencies in trade and one that is free from US sanctions and outside political pressure. Number 2, Israel-Palestine. I want you to look at this map which shows the countries who recognize Palestinian statehood. Around 88% of the world's population lives inside these green countries, and this map is almost identical to the countries who also support de-dollarization and the rise of BRICS. The war in Gaza has become the latest political issue separating BRICS and the United States. The US will of course always support Israel, and quite frankly has proved useless in ending the war in Gaza. But the BRICS alliance will fight back and pursue a path of statehood for Palestine, something that once again 88% of the world's population wants to see. And number 3, the end of US sanctions. Now, the BRICS foreign ministers didn't specifically name the United States, but this point leaves no doubt as to who they were referring to. The ministers expressed concern about the use of unilateral coercive measures, which are incompatible with the principles of the Charter of the UN and produce negative effects on economic growth, trade, energy, health, and food security, notably in the developing world. What I want everyone to realize is that once you remove yourself from the Western media bubble and start to observe global trends, you'll notice the majority of the world are united in what they want. They want economic freedom, and this is why a shift away from the US dollar has begun. They want equal treatment, and this is why 88% of the world once again supports Palestinian statehood. Finally, they want a multipolar world where countries can do business and transact with as many nations as possible. Once again, this is why Saudi Arabia, who is also considering a full BRICS membership later this year, is opening up their oil trade to more countries and currencies around the world. But as you can see with these emerging trends, BRICS is gaining a lot of momentum. Pressure on the US dollar continues to increase, and these conditions will allow for a continued bull market for many industries, but especially the gold market. Now, as a geopolitical commentator, I'm always looking for tipping points in the market. And with that in mind, I want to introduce you to today's video sponsor, who is US Gold Corporation. I'll go ahead and put their ticker symbol on the screen, and if you're like me and believe the geopolitical trends we've discussed in today's video are going to influence the future of markets, pay attention to this next segment as I break down 5 reasons why US Gold Corporation has a great opportunity to capitalize on these trends in the future. Number 1, company structure. US Gold Corp isn't your typical mining stock. This company has been around for many years and is a pure gold and copper play based directly in the United States. There are very few gold mining opportunities directly in the US, as most of the mining companies are in fact located in Canada. But US Gold Corp is headquartered in Nevada, the very state that I also live in, and are listed directly on the NASDAQ exchange. The stock is up over 55% the past 6 months, with a market cap of around $60 million, with a tight share structure and only 10.7 million common shares outstanding. Number 2, fully permitted. This is the major reason we've seen US Gold Corp's stock price rise over the past few months, as the company received its mine operating permit on April 29, 2024. What this means is that US Gold Corp is one of the few US mining companies that are fully permitted, meaning they are bucket ready, an industry term meaning the company is ready to start developing and ultimately producing copper and gold. Number 3, CK Gold Project in Wyoming. Now this is the flagship mining project for US Gold Corp, and a pre-feasibility study shows there are over 1 million proven and probable ounces of gold, in addition to 480 million pounds of copper. And this is where things get very interesting. We all know that the value of gold will continue to rise with the expansion of BRICS, and more central banks around the world snapping up gold for their reserves. But with Saudi Arabia also moving away from the US dollar, this also gives a huge tailwind for the price of gold. But there's also another important geopolitical element. Last year, the US Department of Energy officially added copper to its list of critical raw materials. Copper is needed for many industries, but the soaring demand of both EV vehicles and AI data storage centers have seen the demand for copper also skyrocketed. As many of my long-term followers know, I've been making several videos on both AI and the growing EV market as well. And these industries aren't slowing down anytime soon. So the demand for copper will continue to skyrocket, which is exactly why we've seen the price of copper rise over 70% the past 5 years. Number 4, location. Just like in real estate, mining is all about location, and the CK Gold Project has several unique advantages that you typically don't see in most mining companies. The actual mine is located only 20 minutes west of Cheyenne, the capital city of Wyoming. This is invaluable as the company has clear access to quality labor in the city, but it's also located just a few miles from Interstate 80, a major national highway that allows for easy transport and delivery of both machinery and materials. And the fifth and final reason is the production cost, which leads us directly to the value play here. I'm going to break this down by looking at this pre-feasibility study. And the number I want you to pay attention to the most is this $800 AISC, which stands for all-in sustaining cost. This is essentially how much money does it cost the company to produce 1 ounce of gold. The industry average is around $1,300, but because of US Gold Corp's location and access to resources, they are able to mine gold about 40% cheaper than the competition. But what's most interesting here is the prices listed during this pre-feasibility report that was done in December 2021. Look at the prices of both gold and copper. They listed the average price of gold at only $16.25 an ounce, but gold is now trading above $2,300. Same thing for copper, with an average price of $3.25, while it's now well over $4.40, meaning there is a great value play here with US Gold Corporation. Overall, I remain very bullish on the future of both gold and copper, as I spend so much time analyzing the major geopolitical trends that influence financial markets. Every week, there are new storylines of countries wanting to de-dollarize, and this is why central banks have been stockpiling gold for the past 2 years. In addition, the opportunity for copper has never been greater, with the rise of EVs and AI data centers. But as always, I want you to do your own due diligence before buying any stocks. And to help you with this, I'm going to put the company website, investor presentation, and stock ticker down in the description for you to do more research. As always, I want to thank you for your incredible support, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next video soon.